And scientifically, from research papers, if you follow the certain guide rules, thawing at 20 degrees centigrade is perfectly safe as long as...
Welcome to Highfield Food Safety Bitesize, and today we're going to be talking about thawing of poultry, a subject that's very close to the heart of Richard Sprenger. Richard, thawing of poultry, perhaps we should first start with, well, what are the risks associated with poultry? And then when we look at thawing, how do you control those risks?
Well, the main risks, Sterling, and over the years, poultry has been contaminated with a significant amount of salmonella, and more recently Campylobacter has been the main pathogen of concern. But those are the two pathogens commonly associated with poultry, but relatively easily controlled if you follow good practices. But there are one or two things we do with poultry that we've got to be particularly careful about.
I know we're going to be talking about thawing. So I suppose what you're saying, Richard, is, the poultry that you buy when it's raw, now there is not unlikely that it will be covered with pathogens. And why wouldn't it be when you think of the environment it comes from? And that there are ways that you control those pathogens. So it's a perfectly safe product if you follow some rules. So normally we talk about cooking, but can we talk about thawing? I'm interested in, sometimes you get frozen poultry, a lot of poultry is frozen. What do you think about thawing? What's good practice look like to you, Richard?
Well, you've got to start off by saying, what are most food poisoning outbreaks associated with poultry? And usually it's from undercooking. Usually it's undercooking. Now, why that is significant for thawing is that the most important thing is to thaw poultry completely, because if it's not thawed completely, if there's still ice in the bird, when you cook it, if you're cooking to a recipe which is a timed recipe and not using a thermometer, you aren't going to cook it to the recommended 75 degrees centigrade to destroy the salmonella that may be present, or the Campylobacter that may be present. That's the major problem. But there is also the other significant problem when thawing of cross-contamination, particularly in refrigerators and small refrigerators, domestic refrigerators, which aren't designed to the best because, as you know, the lettuce and the vegetables, salad vegetables, are always at the bottom. If you thaw poultry in there on a plate and the juice from the poultry drops onto the lettuce and the ready-to-eat food, you've got a major contamination risk. Those are the two main problems that I believe in thawing.
So let's take a step back there. When you talk about a refrigerator for thawing, do you have to thaw poultry in a refrigerator, or you could just do it ambient? What's your views on that?
Well, everybody recommends that you should thaw under refrigeration. As I've said, the two major problems might likely be exacerbated if you're using a refrigerator, which is a general purpose refrigerator, because of the cross-contamination and the fact that refrigerators operate at different temperature, which significantly affects the thawing time. So if you could thaw in a dedicated refrigerator from a commercial point of view, operating at around 10 to 15 degrees centigrade, I honestly think that would be the best way. But people don't like saying that you can thaw at ambient. Personally, I think, and scientifically from research papers, if you follow the certain guide rules, thawing at 20 degrees centigrade is perfectly safe as long as always you cook to a core temperature of 75 degrees centigrade. That's the key to safe poultry once thawed. Cook to 75 degrees centigrade. I mean, Sterling, what is the problem that people are talking about with thawing at ambient temperature? What is the risk? What is the hazard associated with thawing at 20 degrees centigrade?
Well, this might be a controversial thought, Richard, but as long as a bird is thawed is the important thing for me. So as long as your method of thawing that you've evaluated and thought about it, then that is your risk assessment. And certainly I have no problems here. Certainly if it was Christmas in my own kitchen, I've seen it elsewhere, that if I get a bird that's far too big for my refrigerator, then you could put it in the garage. As long as you're avoiding contamination from pests or from dirt, as long as you've got it in a good clean space and it's protected, and that you're not over thawing it, I certainly think that the risk is not so great. When you think of what the consequences could be, that if the risk of stuffing a refrigerator with lots of poultry, and then you get that contamination risk, which is, and that's the real big risk, isn't it, with thawed birds? It's a hang around and juices start dropping onto food that's in there because you're cramming as much as you can into your fridge. I think it's about balancing the risks.
Yeah, and I've known for very large birds, they actually spoil before they thaw. That's the other problem you can get, because the spoilage organisms can multiply at low temperatures. But the main hazard that people are talking about is the potential to multiply, the salmonella to multiply, because the temperature is at 20 degrees. But from research, the surface temperature rarely gets anywhere near 20 degrees centigrade as long as you limit the time and you keep control of it. If you limit the time to something like 12 hours or something like that, you've got lag phases, you've got the fact that the core of the bird is likely to be frozen for quite a while and the outside isn't going to be that contaminated. You might get a 1 log increase, and that's very easy on the surfaces to be destroyed by cooking, because if you're cooking to a center temperature of 75 degrees centigrade, the outside is going to be cooked to probably 85 degrees centigrade, more than enough to deal with salmonella and campylobacter. So the main hazard we go back to, it's underthawing and cross-contamination, and that's what we need to focus on, in my view, especially domestically. It's like not washing the bird. Again, washing the bird, people traditionally always wash the bird in the sink and so on. You're just introducing contamination all over. You wipe it up with the dishcloth, and then the dishcloth is spreading the contamination all around the kitchen. Avoid cross-contamination, cook thoroughly, 2 main controls.
Yeah, I think that resonates with me about what is the real risk, because half the job in a kitchen is to work out what are the real risks and what are the lesser risks. And you're quite right, the critical control point, if you don't mind me using that word, is that you cook the bird and then you've effectively killed all the pathogens. And if you don't freeze, if you take a frozen bird and you don't thaw it, the big risk for me is, as you say, the heat's penetrating in there, but because there's ice in there, because it's still kind of frozen, you start to misinterpret how effective your cooking is, because you're not addressing that risk. So
yeah, and you'll remember, you're young enough to remember, Sterling, when we were thawing birds, people used to say never ever cook from frozen, and that's now common in the States. You can actually cook from frozen. How do you cook from frozen safely? What is the main control? Use a thermometer and check you've achieved 75 degrees centigrade, so you cook it for longer. 50 years ago, people would be horrified with that, but nowadays they're realizing that the main control, as you quite rightly said, is cooking to 75 degrees centigrade, to the core temperature.
So an interesting subject to cover. People think thawing a turkey really is a big issue or not, but you can see, unless you do it properly, there could be severe consequences. So
yes,
thanks very much for your insight, Richard. Look, if you've enjoyed the vlog or you think it might be interesting to colleagues, don't hesitate to share it or use it in your training materials. The objective of these vlogs is to help improve food safety and to support people. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you.